It's private sector leadership that makes such a difference in this state. And there's an issue that has come up as number one in our voting in the 14 roadshow stops we've had so far this year, and that is early childhood education. Number one in making a difference in education. Now, if we'd have asked this question 15 years ago, there might have been one person or maybe two in the audience. That would have been a lady by the name of Dr. Kathy Grace, who was back then a voice in the wilderness, talking about how we had to increase early childhood understanding and how this would be good for business. Well, some of our MEC leaders started listening, and one of those was the folks at Chevron Corporation. And Chevron Corporation said, we've got to work on this. We've got to develop a community-based program that will help communities embrace this subject. And so they created Excel by 5. And you'll be hearing a little bit about that today. Then along came our Blueprint Mississippi efforts, and out of that, two great individuals were put together, Anthony Topazzi of Mississippi Power Company at the time, and then Jim Barksdale. And they were put together to try to deal with the ravages of Katrina. So a storm brought these two great leaders together, and they said, let's develop a private sector approach to early childhood. And that Mississippi Building Blocks was born, and you'll hear a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there was an effort to say, how do we get pre-K in place in Mississippi? How do we take that next step? And so some great minds of the legislature came together, meeting with private sector leaders, and again, Dr. Kathy Grace and others, in developing what's called a pre-K collaborative program, which basically helps take state dollars and send them to local-based efforts that make a difference. And that legislation was passed a couple of years ago, and you're going to be hearing about that in just a minute. So it's a public-private partnership that makes a difference. It's how do you use the ingenuity of the private sector to help stimulate growth in the public sector. And that's what this is all about. That's how we move our education system forward. That's how we move our state forward. And once again, this is another example. Well, two members of the legislature, Representative Toby Barker and also Senator Brice Wiggins, embraced these concepts and developed the pre-K collaborative legislation. And they're really going to talk to us a little bit about it today. They're great visionary leaders. They had a very, very strong influence in making this legislation happen. We're going to show you a little video. And let's hear now first from Representative Toby Barker, who will introduce the subject. We'll play the video, and then we'll hear from Senator Brice Wiggins. So let's give Toby Barker a round of applause here.
Today we celebrate and we also refocus on a most important policy area for our state, and that's early childhood education. One of the proudest moments of my legislative career, if not the proudest, was in 2013 when we pushed through the Early Learning Collaborative Act with a lot of teamwork from Mississippi First, from MEC, from Senator Brice Wiggins, who was the real visionary and pushed this through the Senate, and a lot of other partners, along with the leadership of Lieutenant Governor Tate Reeves and Speaker Philip Gunn. Mississippi made its first ever investment in early childhood education. Now, this was significant because at the time, Mississippi was one of the few states who made no effort to get our children kindergarten ready. And it was also significant because we faced a lot of skepticism on whether Mississippi could do it and whether Mississippi could actually do it the right way. A lot of the skepticism came from folks who actually campaigned on early education, which I know it's hard to believe that sometimes the campaign rhetoric doesn't match up with the voting. But still, the bill passed. It was signed by Governor Bryant, and for policymakers, it represented a good decision, a responsible, strategic decision, the right decision. And Mississippi's first step into early learning was done the right way. It was voluntary, where local school districts, Head Starts, and other private providers come together, work collaboratively to raise standards and use evidence-based approaches to get more of our children kindergarten ready. By participating together, these collaborators can actually draw down a one-to-one match from the state. And we also encourage participation from the private sector by offering a tax credit, which you'll hear about later. But we know the data and the literature. We know that so much of a child's emotional, intellectual, and social development happened before the age of 5. We know the returns, the very significant positive returns on investment for early learning. 6-to-1 in the early years and up to 17-to-1 by later in life. And in a state that is plagued by generational poverty, in a state where the reality is over half the babies born in this state are born to unwed mothers, this is a necessary intervention. And while this law represents a good decision, we must recognize that it's not enough to just make a single good decision. We must own the fact that to improve our prospects, to seize the potential that we know we're all capable of, we must consistently make good policy decisions. And this year, much of the education debate is going to center on MAEP and ballot initiatives and Common Core, but I would submit that there is no greater policy area that needs good decision making in 2015 than early childhood education. $3 million in 2013 and 2014 was a good step, but $6 million or $9 million would go a lot further in the future. And we need your help with that. These are our children, and this is our future, and we can decide what that future looks like. And we need each of you advocating for this in 2015 and beyond. But right now, we want you to see this investment in action. Thanks to our partners from Mississippi Public Broadcasting and to early learning collaboratives around the state, we're proud to highlight the significant work that's going on in many of your communities. And so after the video, you're going to hear from Senator Brice Wiggins, who authored the original legislation. But let's watch the video.
We've heard it all before. Mississippi ranking last in all of the good lists and first in all of the bad lists. But I want you to take a listen to what these kids have to say. They might just change the way you think about education in Mississippi.
Because I come to school, I can write my name. R-O-S-S. I learned to have spell when I turned 4. And me too.
These kids don't match the stereotype of Mississippi as last in education. So why is that? Well, these kids were lucky enough to be a part of the Gilmore Early Learning Initiative Collaborative in Monroe County. It's true, Mississippi was one of 11 states that did not have a statewide pre-K program. But because of the foresight of the 2013 legislature in their passing of the Early Learning Collaborative Act, 11 communities were chosen as a starter program for pre-K collaborations in Mississippi. And why is that so important?
Pre-K can have a deep impact on economic development because there is such a huge return on investment for every dollar invested in pre-K. There is a $17 return on every $1 invested.
These are the people that will affect the economy. These are the people that will affect taxpayers' money. So invest now. This is the future.
The most important cognitive, social, and emotional development for a child happens before the age of 5. Not only academic achievement, but also how they socialize, how they grow up, how they do in life. And that's why early childhood education is so critically important.
I want to go to college.
And he has a better chance to do just that because of the legislation that was passed and the investment made in pre-K collaboratives. And guess what? Other states are taking notice.
Since the passage of the bill, we've received national recognition for how we've addressed this, because it's instead of writing a blank check, it is building from the bottom up, and it's not one size fits all. It's about how the local communities can get involved.
It may be in the Head Start, it may be in the child care setting, but there's a consistency in terms of standards and the learning opportunities.
Many states that have state-funded pre-K don't meet 10 of 10 of those near benchmarks, which are research-based. And we wrote into the Early Learning Collaborative Act that Mississippi would meet 10 of 10. So that means that from the get-go, we have one of the highest quality programs in the country according to those standards.
And what does the author do?
Write the picture.
Not
Writes the book.
writes the book, and the illustrator does what?
Write the picture.
He draws the picture. So
The 11 school districts are in their second year of these, and so we'll look back in a couple of years and see, did this make a difference? And that's been our message to these collaboratives is, look, prove us right on this, because we all know that it can make a difference. The evidence says it can make a difference, but there has to be fidelity to implementation. There has to be evidence-based curriculum, and ultimately we need you to be on the front lines and make this happen for these children.
For your name, I'm so proud you can have that. Also,
$3 million was the first year. What we are looking for is to double that to $6 million, which will then allow us to serve more children, to serve broader-based children, and to expand the program.
We can't wait. We have to move forward. We have wasted too much time in the lives of children.
Even in these 11 starter communities, the demand for quality pre-K education far outweighs the supply.
I mean, we can only take 20 kids. You know, they'll normally have between 85 and 105 kindergarten.
I want a kindergarten. Very cool.
Do we have the courage to take the next step and the next step every day to give our children a brighter future? It's up to us. It's up to us.
Because of the investment you made in the education of these lucky few, they are better prepared for the future. Now let's take that further and invest in the future of all Mississippi's kids. The power to change their future is in your hands.
It's up to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great video. Little bit though about my colleague, Representative Barker. Where'd he go? I don't see him. But underneath the sweaters and the buttoned-up tie and the suits and his now Ivy League education from Brown that he got belies a wit that you would not believe. And so, you know, we started the session, and Toby, he's very active on social media. And he sent out a tweet on the first day. So he said, so far, a typical first day at the Capitol. Delbert passed out donuts. There was a rally, and a news crew was following Brice Wiggins. Well, looking at that video, it seems like somebody kind of hogged the video on that. Right, Toby? So, but let me ask you this. When in your life did Mississippi lead the nation in education? Raise your hand if you've ever heard that Mississippi is first in education. I see some people shaking their heads. Building on what Toby said, he's exactly right. We, with this legislation that you just heard about on the video, are leading the nation in education. We are at the forefront of early education. How do I know that? When we passed the bill, or after we passed the bill in 2013, I was invited to many different places, to Washington, D.C., to Atlanta, to Chicago, to talk about what we did here in Mississippi. And I appreciate the governor is big on getting the message out of what we are doing good. And you can take this for what it's worth, but they said, gosh, if y'all did that in Mississippi, well, we can do that. And okay, maybe a backhanded compliment, but you know what? I'll take it. Okay, I'll take it. And and what you saw in the video, what Rachel said, when we did this legislation, we went on the research, on the near scale, from 0 to a 10, the highest in the nation. The highest in the nation. Virginia, who has had early education for 20 years, their ranking was 5. Okay, Louisiana is 6. So we've gone from 0 to 10. We're leading the nation. I got a call the summer after we did this from a reporter in Idaho with the Idaho Statesman. He said, Senator Wiggins, he said, we heard about what y'all did with that legislation. Our politics in Idaho, very conservative state, very similar to Mississippi, but there are people who say we need early education. He called and said, how did y'all do that? How did y'all do that? And I proceeded to tell him. And also one of the things that I told him is this legislation that you heard about, since I have been here, since I've been in office, was passed with a broader base of coalition than any other legislation that has come through the Capitol. We had MEC, we couldn't have done it without it, law enforcement, church leaders, educators, Democrats. We had everybody. They supported it. And thank you, Governor. And I want to say, that's about, in my opinion, that's about leadership. The governor has been out there. That's about leadership. It's about providing the best future for our children. And so, you know, it's a proud thing that we've done, and I would say that the legislature has given you, the business community, something that you've asked for. When we launched into this, what I heard, and starting with Chevron, my good friend Steve Renfro, who was there, continuing with Alan Sudduth, what we heard was, we, the business community, we don't have the workforce. We're not getting the workforce that we need. We want to invest in Mississippi. We want to hire Mississippians, but we aren't getting that, and we support early education. And so with this legislation, we've provided that to the citizens and to you, the business community. And so I'll leave you with this. You go, well, how can we help? What you have in your packet is investing in pre-kindergarten, and Toby alluded to it about the tax credits. What we did in the legislation, and he's right about the private sector being involved. We knew that the state of Mississippi cannot afford this on our own. It's the public-private partnership that Blake alluded to. And what we said was, individuals, businesses, entities, if you contribute to a collaborative, then you get a one-for-one tax credit. And then what that does is that builds the collaborative's coffers, and they use that to match the funds. It describes it in here. And it's capped at $3 million. So, and I'll pick on Chevron because I always pick on them. But, for example, if Chevron writes a check for $1 million to the Jackson Collaborative Act, Chevron gets a $1 million tax credit. The Jackson Collaborative gets $1 million in there. They use those matching funds to draw down the money from the state. So they have $2 million, or they're eligible for $2 million to be able to invest in early education. You can do that. I can go home, write a $100 check to the collaborative, and I get a tax credit. And it's capped, and it's a race. The way it's done, it's a race to the Department of Revenue. So start writing out those checks because it's capped at $3 million. And as the video said, we want to continue that and invest in that. So thank you for being here and for allowing Mississippi to be a leader in this area.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Representative Barker, for your leadership in this. And of course, you know, one of the organizations that kind of got it all going was Excel by 5, and that is, again, a private sector response. And you'll have on your sheet, on your places, you'll see this little card that shows where the private sector resources are deploying. And it all started with the vision of the folks at Chevron. Let's hear now from Alan Sudduth. Alan Sudduth. Alan, come on up.
Well, good morning. I'm glad there was a little bit of a break between Brice's example of Chevron giving $1 million check and me getting up here. Hopefully we can move quickly past that. But I am very encouraged, as I hope you are, when I hear from our elected officials about their interest and their energy in early childhood education. Because as Brice has said, and as Representative Barker has said, we see on the private side, the private sector, the value of early childhood education. We know that on the economic development side, on having an adequate workforce, as has been said before, that early childhood education plays a key role in that. But we also know, Chevron, we know that from a personal standpoint. We're all Mississippians. We've lived through it. We've had generations through what Senator Wiggins was talking about the impression that people have of education in Mississippi. So both from a personal perspective and from a business perspective, we've really had an energy, if you will, about seeing what we can do to help improve early childhood education. And one way we saw that we could help was with all the things that were going on inside the classroom, could we help with somewhat of a broad-based coalition, a community-based coalition, to help with the learning environment, with the development environment of those kids, not just in the classroom, but in the community. And we were working with great folks that offered resources like the Mississippi State University Early Childhood Institute. We were able to put together resources. We were able to put together support that we were able to introduce. And we started with 4 pilot programs in Jackson County. Now, there's many ways to measure success. One way may be in participation. And when we started with those 4 pilot programs about 10 years ago, through the leadership of folks like our executive director, Mr. Bob Clay, I see him out there, if you'll raise your hand, Bob, and through other financial investors like MEC members, Huntington Ingalls, Mississippi Power and Entergy, and through foundations like the Community Foundation for North Mississippi and the Walker Foundation, we have gone from those 4 pilot programs to 36 communities, both certified and candidate communities in the state of Mississippi in that 10-year period. So we're very excited for where we have gone. I would invite you to determine for yourself the success of these programs. Because if there's 36 going from Corinth to Biloxi, there's odds are either your community or community nearby you is actively involved in Excel by 5. So from Chevron's perspective and from, again, our co-sponsors, our co-investors, we want to thank Excel by 5. We want to thank you for what you've done for Mississippi. We want to thank you for helping influence economic development and the workforce by helping make sure our youngest citizens, 0 to 5, are happy, healthy, and ready to learn. Thank you.
So you're asking me, Blake, what are you doing having the Children's Defense Fund on a business program, okay? I know some of you are thinking that. And the next speaker, Oleta Fitzgerald, and I don't agree on everything, but we do agree on one thing, and that is children are the future of Mississippi. And we have become great partners in working on this effort. She sits on the board of Mississippi Building Blocks. She has helped been a driving force. April May, the executive director of Building Blocks, is here somewhere. April, wave to everybody. Stand up, wave, Kate, stand up. We'll give her a round of applause. April May from Mississippi Building Blocks. Started as a private sector program, is now funded with $3 million from the legislature. So you have this focusing on the little kids who are in daycare centers, and then the pre-K focusing on getting them to the next level. So we're not just spending $3 million on early ed in Mississippi, we're spending $6 million. So you see, and then all of the private sector resources leverage those up to the next level. And Oleta Fitzgerald, having been served as chief of staff to a United States Congressman, Congressman Espy, and long involved as a senior leader in the Children's Defense Fund with a national presence, gets it. And I think you'll hear today how important this is and how important our partnership with unlikely partners really does pay off. Please join me in welcoming Oleta Fitzgerald from the Children's Defense Fund.
Good morning. There are no unlikely partners with children. We need everybody in the room. We need everybody working on behalf of children. Blake mentioned that I sit on the advisory board for Mississippi Building Blocks. I've also been a member of the Excel by 5 advisory board since its institution, I guess I could say. We certainly at the Children's Defense Fund and in the advocate community appreciate all of the work that has been done by Representative Barker and Senator Wiggins and Mississippi First on this issue. As Blake asked me to speak this morning, when he started speaking, he said everything I was going to say. But what he said to me was, we need a cheerleader. So that's why I am here. And I want to go back 10 years before last year, when the Mississippi Economic Council, Mississippi Building Blocks, Excel by 5, Sanderson Farms even in the early years provided their own child care centers for their employees, and they have been leaders in that regard. The Children's Defense Fund, through its Spark program, which is mentioned as an example in the legislation that got passed on the Early Learning Collaborative, started the foray into the business collaboration by working with the Delta Council and Tom Gresham. And that collaboration continues, and work that we have done has been picked up by Morgan Freeman in Tallahatchie County and the Delta Health Alliance in Indianola, and can be seen throughout the applications that have come in through the early learning collaboratives. This issue of early childhood, and it's come a long way, and people have begun to understand the brain science and how it connects to K-12 education. The governor has a big focus on children being able to read at the 3rd grade, which is a yeoman agenda. But we all know that there has to be something that happens prior to that. There are about 40,000 children who come into public school every day at kindergarten. That means that there are about 40,000 3-year-olds that are tracking to public school. If we could take, and there are about 20,000, about half of those children are in some kind of organized early childhood program. If we can increase the quality where those children are, including in Head Start, and align the systems the way the early learning collaboratives are set up to do, so that Head Start child care is talking to public schools, then we can change the trajectory of this state economically in one generation. And there are a lot of problems that we have in Mississippi. People talk about them all the time. But we know that education is one way that we can change the trajectory. The research and development has been done. We know what needs to be on the assembly lines. We need to invest in the assembly line. We can take 20,000 children and increase their access to quality early childhood education. And in one generation, we can see a huge difference, both economically and socially, in the state of Mississippi. So thank you. We want to thank Mississippi Building Blocks. We want to thank Excel by 5 for being there. We want to thank all of the business leaders that have been part of this effort. Thank you very much.
You look at Excel by 5, a number of counties covered. You look at the Early Childhood Learning Collaborative Program, and you'll see down at the bottom, you'll see a list of where they're already reaching. These maps were basically blank 11 years ago. This is what happens when people get together and start pulling in a common direction. This is how you move the state forward.